And then, let's see.
All right, you want to just give me an audio check?
All right, checking the audio, seeing how's it sound.
All right, that sounds good.
All right,
I don't have
yeah,
my
I
headphones in, but
moved the microphone to.
all right. So I'm sure people start popping in. We're live now. So guys, I'm here with Kurt Smock. He is a Bitcoin investor, and he is here to talk about HEX. Welcome, Kurt.
Hey, thanks for having me. Um, yeah, my name's Kurt Smock. I have a very long and complicated background, but today I am an accountant. That's what I do for money. And yeah, I've been in crypto since 2017, like most of us. However, before that, I've always been really passionate about economics and traditional markets. And really, that's all I spend my time doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I pretty much, well, I mean, that's probably extreme. But yeah, I spend all my time in the markets and in economics and in those areas. Those are my areas of interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hoping to, be able to have the conversation today. And my intention is just to plainly just have a real conversation around the definitions of what a scam is and whether or not HEX fits into that.
Sure.
So we don't know each other. And I guess also, where am I in reference to HEX? I'm not a part of the team. I don't know Richard personally. I've sent him a couple DMs, and that's like really stretching the extent of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know the guy. I've been following him for quite a while. Pretty much ever since I got into crypto. Have you been following Richard closely, or is he kind of a new face to you?
Just recently. I mean, he's kind of a toss up for me personally. I mean, I like his views on a lot of things, honestly. About Bitcoin, blockchain, investments, things like that. I mean, he pretty much is a straight shooter. He's not gonna sugarcoat anything for you, which is one thing I really like about him. Sometimes, he could be a little rough around the edges, but he seems to be one of those kind of guys that you either love him or you hate him. A lot of people have ill feelings towards him. I mean, I'm kind of indifferent. I like his his straightforward approach. But
Yeah,
really, my only concern with him personally is this whole HEX thing.
yeah, that's interesting. So, what would be the if I had to, like I said, just for context, what would be like the number one or most remembered video you've seen of Richard Hart? Like, was there a stream that he did that like you're like I remember, because I was thinking myself the same question, and I think the most memorable uh, video that he does have is the one that Peter McCormick referenced in a recent live stream,
Yeah.
where he was on with Ivan on Tech.
Right.
Great guy, I love that guy. He is so fun. I mean, he's cool. I don't watch his stuff too much, but I think he's great. And he was on with Ivan on Tech, and he actually kind of like literally choked up because price was crashing, and he was thinking about everyone was feeling it, and Peter McCoy made out like he was crying like a baby, but he wasn't. He just genuinely got emotional, and I think most of the time we respect people for that, and that for whatever reason, probably because of the emotion of the moment, and because that's how the mind works. The brain thinks in emotions, not so much in rational logic. It stores in emotion, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the one I remember. Do you have anything from him that you watched that you particularly liked?
I mean, his recent stuff, with Roger Ver and I mean, he's been doing a lot of debates lately. Trying to trying to push HEX and all that. So I've been watching a
Yeah,
lot of that stuff, trying to, gather up information on it and come to the correct conclusion, which
yeah,
I feel is the
absolutely.
correct conclusion.
That's cool. And what is it that you do? Like, what's your background? Just for me, I'm sure your audience knows, and I apologize,
Well, I
audience, for
mean,
not knowing.
personally, I own my own HVAC business. I do that. I got into crypto. I knew about it in 2017. My nephew was telling me about it like in spring of 2017. Right away, I thought the whole thing was, a scam. Um, what is crypto really based on? That was my main concern. And then as the year goes on, you see the price go up and up and up. I didn't actually start buying crypto until it started coming down a little bit. I was doing a few months worth of research on it, seeing what projects I should invest in, where I should, put my future fortunes, I guess you could say, in, and
Right,
hope for the best.
right on, man. Yeah, I noticed that it looks like I'm not showing. Oh, cool. I think we can get my face on here if it'll let me. I don't know. I noticed that
It should
I
be
don't
in,
I don't have a face on your stream.
yeah, it should be in the bottom left hand corner. It'll say start video. If you just click on that, then it'll stream your camera. I don't put my camera on because I'm like streaming a bunch of things at once, so I try to minimize
No, that
the
makes
amount of
sense.
stuff I have to have
That's
going through.
and, and again, I normally don't live stream, so I'm clicking it and nothing's happening. So we'll live with that if we have to. I got the correct camera selected and such, so that should be the right deal. I guess I didn't test it in Zoom.
Oh, that's
I
all right.
see me here.
No
Anyway,
big deal.
all
So
right, cool. So
yeah,
we'll
let's get
proceed.
into HEX. What you know about it and why you feel that it's a good investment for the future.
Okay, so yeah, it really does a lot of the idea of scam really does circle and center around the founder, Richard Hart, and I think that that's a very significant place to start. Is really starting with Richard Hart, and then diving into Hex from there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you followed Richard Hart for a very long time, or since he kind of came out publicly in Bitcoin, you would know, you would have the context. I would say that throughout all of his participation in the crypto space, it has been directed largely out of self-interest, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. He says all the time that he came out to defend Bitcoin because he saw Ethereum was passing Bitcoin in value, and he kind of came out to protect his bag. I mean, it's totally reasonable. Now, as far as all of his content that you can watch, and you can go all the way back to the beginning of his YouTube channel, he was really interested in self-development when he started, and then he flipped over to talking about crypto. So I saw him
Right.
and was like, wow, this guy's really genuine, and he seems really smart. And I go to his YouTube channel, and I didn't do this with you out of fairness. I wanted to come in blind to this stream, so I didn't do this for you. But generally, when I find someone who's really interesting and has a YouTube channel, I go back and I watch their first video or their first couple videos, and I did that, and they were all self-help, personal improvement type things. And that was when I became a fan of Richard Hart, because he was putting out really smart ideas that would really help people. And so I'm like, well, this is a guy who's doing good things for the world. So that was I've been following him since, and I've watched a ton of his videos, probably most of his videos. He makes great background noise when you're working, because he's always repeating himself. I mean, which is great. So I've never known Richard Hart to be a scammer of any kind, even though some people have, asserted that, like, oh, he used to be Mr. I saw what Box Mining did a video that was just deplorable. It was insane, where he's like, oh, he was Mr. Spammer. Someone called him Mr.
Right.
Spammer. And it's like, well, guess what, buddy? There was a chock load of money to make back in the day just doing email spam programs, which, yeah, were they spam? Yes. Does that have a negative connotation? Yes. But listen, if I send out 10 million emails and they click through to whatever, they click through to hair products, if I get a conversion rate of 0.05% of the time, I'm making a ton of money. And there's nothing unethical, wrong, or ill-advised about doing that. It was smart business, and a lot of people got very, very rich doing that. It was a big part of e-commerce in the early days, and it's what made it so lucrative.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that the guy started out as an entrepreneur, and one of the things, it was not the only thing, but one of the things he did was email affiliate marketing and what we would call now spam emailing. That was just the way the game was played on the internet back then.
Right.
Of course, a lot of these crypto kids are too young to even remember that. But, I mean, it was good business. So also him being a businessman. I've owned my own business since I was 23, and I'm mid-30s now. My wife, she also owns her own business. She has the largest children's entertainment company in our area here in Pennsylvania. And, so I respected him on that level. So I say all that to say, like, Richard Hart doesn't really have any real incentive to scam anybody, because look at what he's exposing himself to. He is an identifiable individual. He's an identifiable individual. And as an identifiable individual, he becomes a massive target. Mm-hmm. People can try to hack his Bitcoin wallets, right? People can try to find his location on the earth. If he gets involved in a scam, he'll be a hunted man, and his face will be as prominent now as these Plus Token Ponzi folks, right?
Right.
He had a good life. He has a real good life. Why on earth would anybody with a fantastic life, with all the money that they need to survive and thrive, go through the trouble of exposing themselves to a massive liability like that? I can't, especially someone really smart. And I think no matter what anyone says about Richard in terms of his scam quotient, we'd all agree the guy is super smart. So I would start the conversation there and say, looking at the individual closely, I don't see an incentive to scam. Can he make more money? Sure, but he already has a ton of money.
Right.
Why would you risk going to jail for a couple more bucks? So, and then HEX itself. If you follow the development of HEX, which there was a gal who I don't know and don't follow, but she did an interview with a developer from HEX. I don't know. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen it. But let me intervene real quick before we get into kind of some technical stuff with HEX.
Okay, yeah, sure.
As Richard Hart is basically a serial entrepreneur, being one myself, I kind of understand the emotions and the thought process that goes behind something like that. Even when I was a kid in school, grade school, middle school, I was doing all types of different things to try to earn income, from like just drawing pictures and selling them to classmates and stuff like that. So you always have that in the back of your head that you're trying to self-better yourself, and you're trying to create some type of income for yourself. And that's just the mindset that those type of people have. So it might not necessarily come across, he might not be trying to portray it as a scam. It might not actually be that that's his initial intent, but he's really in it for himself, honestly, from what I've seen with this project.
Well, and of course, anyone who starts a business is in it for themselves. No one takes on hundreds of customers like we do, because we both, I don't have hundreds of customers. I have a small base of clients that I work with. My wife, she has thousands of customers, though, and you don't take on thousands of customers unless you're getting something out of the deal, because let's face it, people are a pain. Right. Yeah. Some customers are awesome, but people can be a pain. So I can't fault him for that. And to the point of that he's portraying it as a scam, or he's not portraying it as a scam, I would argue that he is, in fact, really portraying it as a scam, and maybe too much, because of the fact that because of the portrayal, it is then turning into a perception equals reality thing,
Right.
where people are believing it to be a scam, even though it's really not.
Well, I mean, the way he markets it is definitely very questionable,
Yeah,
especially
I
when
mean
you
it's
have guys like
scammy marketing.
yeah, especially when you have guys like Trayvon James supporting it and making videos on it now. I mean, everybody knows him through BitConnect, and
Yeah,
that's if it was my project, I'm definitely steering away from those type of influencers, I guess you can call them. So
yeah,
if I saw him, if I really wanted to help the people, and I saw somebody like that coming on board trying to promote it, I would I would come out in public and say, listen, man, you can't promote this project. You have a shady past, and that's not something I really want to have the community see out of my project.
true. At the same time, again, if we keep it in the context of conventional business, I actually started out in construction,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was 18, I got married and I jumped in the construction yard. And I've been in thousands of houses, and I can't imagine that out of those thousands of people who have patronized my business over the years, that all of them are good people, right?
Right.
And maybe they even referred a friend. And I got a phone call, from a friend of theirs. Potentially, I can't say for sure, but I mean, the reality is that everyone is talking about HEX. So if the objective was virality,
Mm-hmm.
then the objective is a smashing success,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there is nobody that's not talking. I know of. I can't think of anyone who isn't in terms of like the big names,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And this is actually. Are you familiar with the author and speaker Ryan Holiday?
No.
Okay, so he's been on like Lewis Howe and Tim Ferriss and all these guys. He has a lot of books, amazing books. The one that he did recently, he made all his money as a marketer.
Mm-hmm.
So he's an internet marketer, and he wrote this book. It was called "Trust Me, I'm Lying." And the premise of the book is it's an expose of how media works in our nation, in the United States, most of Europe. And the way it works is that what you need to create a real story that has real virality is to pass it up the chain, is the way he calls it.
Mm-hmm.
So you need small and obscure people to talk about a topic. And then you need a bigger blog to pick that story up. And then a bigger blog will pick that story up. And then eventually you may even end up on national news.
Right.
And what you're doing is you're disseminating your story out through a base layer of small individuals or entities that are trying to find stories constantly, because that's the media's job, is always come up with a new story.
Mm-hmm.
So you feed them the story, to as many sources, to the most hungry source, to the one that's going to take it, and then they're going to publish. And then what you need to happen is to see all the other feedback loops fall into line, and you end up with a massive story. And he outlines several things that were like patently false that ended up on national news, and he can diagram it to where he specifically started that story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. So in that sense, Richard Hart is deploying the exact same pass it up the chain marketing concept, which is phenomenal. And what spreads faster than scam talk in crypto, right? Scam is like the most overused word of the planet. And I hope we get a chance to talk specifically about scam as a word and as a, by its definition. But, he put out an idea of HEX, and the word scam got like attached. I almost would give Tone Vase most the credit for the scam, because he's really the one who initiated the flat out "it's a scam" thing. But then again, to Tone Vase, everything's a scam if it's not Bitcoin. But that caught on, and it's just pervaded the entire crypto universe, man. You are not in crypto if you haven't heard about HEX recently,
right,
or you've been out of the game for a while.
Right.
So I think that is a phenomenal bit of marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we can go into scam, right? I mean, that's kind of like, if you look at Richard, he doesn't have any history of scamming. You can't find a victim. If you go back to his oldest videos, they're geared around helping others. If you go back to all of his videos before HEX and you really actually watch them, he's constantly trying to educate people and give people his best version of the truth and of knowledge. So that's Richard, and that's the way I see him. So I don't see him as a very good. Oh, and then there's the liability risk. Why take on the risk? You know, why? Like I have had legal troubles myself. Like like whether it's being sued or whatnot. You know, problems in the neighborhood that involve the police. Man, like what crazy nut job who's sitting fat and happy is going to expose himself to legal risk of jail? Now I get it if like Bernie Madoff, he could have exited his Ponzi like way earlier than he did. He just kept the game running. But if you go back to when he started his Ponzi, it makes a lot of sense. He was trying to make a name for himself. He was trying to get big. What's the incentive for Richard? I don't see it. I think he literally is just a good dude trying to do good things in the world. Well, if that's true, it doesn't make HEX not a scam, but it does mean that when we analyze his intent, that I believe he has good intent. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a critical component in this matrix of the scam that we're building.
Well, I mean, he does a really good job of, playing word gymnastics and making sure that his name isn't part of any future HEX development. He makes that perfectly clear when he has his debates with everybody. He tells people that he can't be looked to for future development or future investment into HEX, or he can't personally guarantee anything. So he kind of takes his liability off the table when he does that. I don't know if that's for legal issues or anything like that, but he does a good job of trying to disconnect himself from the project so that any future questions can't really be thrown back in his face, because he kind of laid out the way it's going to be from the get-go.
Yeah. Well, and so if we move off of Richard and we start looking at HEX, what is HEX? HEX is a smart contract. That's really all it is, right? Mm-hmm. So is it a scam? I mean, it could be it's a smart contract. Like, it's immutable. It's on the ledger. It's out in the wild. The guy who developed the smart contract really doesn't have too much control at this point, now that it's been released, right? Because the rules of the contract would have to be changed. And I'm not a programmer, so I don't even know if that's possible. I suppose potentially it could be possible to modify the contract, but then that runs outside my field of expertise. But when you look at HEX, what is it ultimately? It's just a smart contract. Now, I can talk because I'm not in any way affiliated with Richard Hart or with the project. So, like, I can toss my personal ideas, because I have to analyze this just like you and just like everyone watching. Like, is it something worth spending any time looking at? Mm-hmm. And I have to make my own evaluation, Richard, in that sense. And when I look at HEX as an entity, I'm like, it's a smart contract that has rules and does things. Now, from a legal perspective, because again, my career is in accounting and I'm heavily involved in finance, so I have a pretty strong familiarity with the SEC and their guidelines and rulings and such, though I'm not a lawyer. What I can bet you any amount of money he's done, I mean, I would bet anything, is that he knows that jail time is the risk. So he has the money, and he spent hundreds of thousands in the development of this project. I'm sure he dipped out the extra couple grand to sit down with the securities lawyer and really clearly define how he can maneuver within the framework and context of the project and crypto and current regulations, and how he could not be qualified as a security. Right. So if he did that, and of course he's never going to admit to us that he did, but if he did that, then he's just following the advice of a lawyer that is doing everything that was hired to do everything he could to explain how we engage in HEX without it being a security. Because really, what it comes down to there is a question of legality. I don't know, just curiosity, how do you feel about Edward Snowden and what he did? Do you feel, is he a hero or a villain in your world?
I don't know the whole story, but I would lean more towards hero than a villain type of thing.
Same here. Same here. Yeah. What Edward Snowden did, he did an interview recently, and I thought the way he explained himself, he's also very eloquent, brilliant man. He said, I'm happy to come back to the United States and have a trial. The thing is this, if we're going to do that, I want the jury to be able to consider if what I did was right or wrong, and not just whether it was legal or illegal. And what he's doing, he's drawing the parallel between what he did as a moral good versus what he did as a legal good. And we could apply the same concept anyway. I don't think Richard Hart is anywhere in the same ballpark, but the principle that underlines that is still applicable. That is to say, Richard Hart could want to start something that is very good for humanity and a very good thing for people on the whole. Makes the world a better place. It's a good idea. I mean, blockchain CD, it's a good idea. We can talk about those economics too. But offering a security is illegal. So Richard Hart is then doing exactly what Edward Snowden is doing. Edward Snowden is staying in Russia to protect his personal freedom against a legal system that is garbage and will absolutely throw him in jail, no matter how good of a thing he did for the world. And let me tell you, what Edward Snowden did was a phenomenal social good, right? And we will throw him in jail as soon as he steps foot in this country. And he's avoiding jail because he wants to do the right thing. He did the right thing, and now he's just doesn't want to go to jail. I think Richard Hart could be in the same category. He's trying to do a really good thing, but he doesn't want to go to jail. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's okay. Of course, that doesn't address whether or not it's a scam, but I'm kind of drawing these other parallels and frames of reference to kind of say, hey, there's other ways we can look at this rather than purely on the basis of what we think the origin address person is, or where is all the ETH going, right? Like, there's other ways we can look at that. So we can dive into HEX specifically.
Let's get into some of that. So let's get into some of that stuff, because that's the more concerning stuff for people. As far as if he's doing social good, it's very difficult to get HEX. If you had Bitcoin, yes, you can get the. He doesn't call it an airdrop, but it's an airdrop, essentially, just for lack of a better term. And if you don't have that, then you have to essentially put your Ethereum in a pot, and it is transformed into HEX, or you can buy it on market. So those are the three ways to obtain HEX. Now, what gives HEX its value? Who knows? I mean, if he's trying to use it as a means of transaction, or whatever the plan is, but his whole thing is he wants to let the people in on Bitcoin 2.0, I guess you could say, well after the fact. But if he does that, I know there's whale penalties and things like that, but you could split up the Bitcoin into multiple addresses and still claim HEX. So all you're really doing is taking Bitcoin whales and transforming them into HEX whales if they want it to be.
They could. I mean, they would have to expend effort in order to do that. Like if you had a big address, then you could go through the effort of parsing it down to avoid the silly whale penalty, and then you go into the claim phase, and you have to claim from every single individual wallet, and then deal with the staking. So, I mean, you would really have to care if you were a sizable whale and you wanted to do that. But you're absolutely correct. It is possible to remain a whale. He does create friction to that, as opposed to, say, a Bitcoin Cash release, which Richard cites often. but other forks as well, other airdrops as well.
Right.
A lot of times, what people are doing in these projects is they're attempting to make it as easy as possible, which generally makes a lot of sense for people to get involved, for people to claim. Now, Hex is doing this in one way by making it easy to transform your ETH. However, he is making it difficult for those that he doesn't really want in, like the Mt. Gox trustee, which I think is great. I mean, isn't that good? It's good that the Mt. Gox trustee doesn't get any Hex.
Right.
Positive thing. But nonetheless, I guess if we were going down the different bonus structures and stuff, like the whale, like I'm gonna have Hex, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I actually looked up the definitions because I was like really even torn on am I even invested in Hex? Because I didn't actually expend anything. And so I would say for those that free claim, you're actually not investing in Hex in a pure sense, because to invest is to expend something in exchange for something,
right,
in hopes that that something that you exchange for
increases
in value, right? So that is the definition of an investment. And so those that are putting ETH in the bucket are in fact investing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important, because now if we're investing, now we're in danger of securities law, right? Which then goes into his the reality for him, which is that, hey, if this is going to be potentially subject to a security law, what can I not do? And so he's doing what you can't do, which is you can't promise future work. You can't promise returns.
Right.
So let's say I got 1 ETH, I got an ETH and I got the rest of my stack in Bitcoin. And my 1 ETH cost me what? $130 or $110, whatever it is now.
Right.
What do I care? I spent $100 on what? A nice meal. I mean, you can barely go on a date with the wife for $100 anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if I invest my 1 ETH and I throw it in that bucket, did I take on any risk? Like, I didn't take on any risk. Like, there's no risk. Either my 1 ETH pays me in the future or it doesn't. I look at it this way: if I can unload whatever Hex I got for 1 Satoshi in the future, then I made money on my investment, right? The situation for people contributing ETH is different. However, the people who free claimed cannot possibly be scammed, because they haven't been scammed out of anything.
Exactly.
Like they had no investment. So that is like really a very principal leg of my argument in terms of why it's not a scam. Because you can't scam me, even though I have a ton of Hex, because I literally did nothing to get it.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, that's
pushed
a fair
couple buttons and
assessment
paid some gas.
That's a fair assessment there. However, once that snapshot was taken, that's pretty much it. So now your only ways to get it are, via Ethereum or purchasing it from an exchange with extremely low liquidity.
Yeah. So if you're going to buy on exchange, this is just the trading tip for everyone. Look very carefully at the order book. I'm not saying you should buy it, because if it is a scam, you shouldn't. But we're working through that right now. But if you're going to buy something with low liquidity, make sure you look very closely at the order book. Try to structure it through limit buys instead of market buys, and make sure that the amount that you're market buying is always less than the next available offer on the level 2. Yeah, so that covers that. How not to get screwed trying to buy it on an exchange is really up to you. You got to know how order books work.
But now with the,
because you can there's a ton of offers there, right? I mean, you can buy up plenty of Hex without slippage. You just have to do it carefully and make sure you know what you're doing.
Right.
So, yeah, just be careful out there, because a lot of ways to lose money in financial instruments.
Yeah, so I want to take like a pretty deep dive into this whole Ethereum transforming into Hex situation.
Yeah, because like I said, we can put a pin in that. If you free claimed, you weren't scammed. You didn't pay anything. Like, someone hands me a free ice cream and it tastes like crap. Did I get scammed? Like, not. I didn't invest anything. There's nothing to get scammed from. So since we're going to go into the actual meat of the matter, let's talk about what a scam is. So a scam is a dishonest scheme. It is a fraud. That is what a scam is. And that would be the definition that we should agree on, because like I even spoke with someone in your Twitter, in your Twitter thread today, where he's like, Social Security is a scam. And I'm like, okay, well, is it a fraud? Like, technically it is, because Social Security can't pay its unfunded obligations. So it is very much like a Ponzi. However,
yeah, it's like a pyramid scheme.
Well, yeah. Now a Ponzi, we should describe Ponzi too. What a Ponzi is it, and it's very, very specific. What it is the payouts of the investment come not from the appreciation of the investment, but rather new investors. So it's a very specific type of scam in that it is dishonest, it is a fraud. But what is the fraud? Plus Token just did this to a bunch of people, where they took money, and then if they ever had to pay out, they paid out from the money they took, up until the point where either they couldn't or no longer wanted to. I think in Plus Token's case, like they just had so much Bitcoin, like just take the Bitcoin and run, But that's what a Ponzi is. And Social Security is like that, because younger guys like you and me are paying Social Security taxes. And that money, based on all available data, will not be available to us in the future when we retire. That is a Ponzi, except for one minor detail. That is that the government has the relationship it does with the Federal Reserve. So if it couldn't pay, it could always print more currency and thus pay. Now, that would destroy the US dollar. It would be economic collapse. However, they still paid.
Right.
So it can't be a Ponzi. I mean, as crappy as that is, it should be a Ponzi, but they happen to have the button on the printing press. So boom, not a Ponzi. So that's the way I would look at a Ponzi. That's the way I would look at a scam. So let's dive into ETH and the transform feature. Right. And let's talk about whether that is a scam or not.
So there's a website, hexstat.com.
Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that tells you there's a bunch of different things on that site. You can find out about the adoption amplifier and all kinds of who's staking, when they're dropping out of staking, and all that stuff. So it's a good site to find out information about HEX. If you look at the very first day when this was available, you can see that a lot of people dumped HEX in. And you're looking at about 47,000 HEX per Ethereum. So people that got in on that day, Ethereum right now is almost 1.8 million Satoshis. And I believe HEX is trading either 1 or 2 Satoshis right now. So you basically took an Ethereum that's worth 1.8 million Satoshis and turned it into 48,000 Satoshis, essentially. If it's worth 1 sat.
So you're saying that the Satoshi value. I didn't do math on this, but this is a good point to bring out. So what you're saying is people converted. I'm trying to find the HEX stat, like where it said.
It's under.
Are you on the charts?
Yeah, under HEX charts.
The HEX charts. Oh, and there it is. Yeah, ETH deposited.
So the very first day, there was 21,000 Ethereum deposited in there. And then there was 1 billion HEX available. So in case people don't know, every day there's basically 2 pots. One pot is full of HEX, which is about 500 million per day. I don't know does that gradually get less, Kurt?
Yes. Okay. They're following very closely to the EOS model. If you remember, EOS is crowdfund from the last year, where every day a certain amount of HEX is available. Everyone throws the ETH in that wants HEX, and end of the day, everyone has contributed a percentage of the total ETH, and thus the HEX is distributed according to those percentages.
Right. So
And so that shrinks because of the number of unclaimed coins shrink.
mhm.
So there's a metric that that says X amount of unclaimed coins exist, so we will offer them in the adoption amplifier. So as more Bitcoin claim, less HEX will be available in the adoption amplifier. But it's divided out over the full period.
Mhm.
So the initial reductions have been very, very small. As you can see across this HEX stat chart, it dropped to about 500 million after that, and then it has stayed very close to 500 million since, and it will until the power of compounding eventually takes it out.
Right. So it'll just drop. To finish up on that point, the two buckets, 500 million HEX in one bucket, and the other bucket is empty. People depositing Ethereum will put it in the empty bucket. That will fill up towards the end of the day, based on how many Ethereum are in there, is the percentage of HEX you will get out of the 500 million or whatever's in the HEX bucket. So it turns into a game of chance. For me, you could take an Ethereum that's worth 128 right now, and about 1.8 million satoshis, and based on this game of chance, if there's 2,000 Ethereum in the pot, or if there's 10 Ethereum in the pot, you never know how much HEX you're going to get back out of this. So essentially, that's very misleading to people. I don't know if that's not really a fair distribution model in my eyes. One day you could get, like the very first day you got 47,000 HEX per Ethereum. And then now, today, there's only about 225 HEX in the bucket, so you're going to get 1.8 million. So right now, if you deposited an Ethereum into the bucket, you'll pretty much break even with that. Because I think HEX is about 1 sat right now. It might be 2 sats, but...
Yeah, it's just staying in the 1 to 10 range, depending on the moment you look at it.
So, I mean, there's a huge gap between these days. You never know how the day's going to end.
Right. Now, here's something that's really interesting that happened in EOS. I followed EOS very closely because I was a big fan of Dan Larimer out the gate. So when he announced EOS, I was fascinated. I guess I didn't mention this, but really, I'm a retail trader in terms of my involvement in crypto. But outside of that, the main reason I'm here, although I love the trade and enjoy it and do well enough, I am an economist, like, by passion, right? I don't have any academic papers that you guys can look up or any fancy models with advanced maths, but like, I love economics. And what crypto does is it creates this pure economic playground because of the fact that there is no government to impose regulations. So whatever the free market actually wants to happen actually has to happen, because there's no friction or barriers to entry, or like trading, for example. You want to trade full-blown real order books, footprint charts, live data, like the best of the best, like, tools for scalping, you can get it for free in crypto. You're not going to get it for free anywhere else in any other market, right? And I mean, like, that granular data, the stuff that real edges are made of, outside technical price chart analysis. So EOS was fascinating because what it did was, even though they launched over a year, and I think we'll see the same with HEX, which is why it's relevant, what ultimately happened is someone who wanted to put ETH in the bucket looked at the EOS price, and they kind of waited till the last minute, and they were looking for that arbitrage. Anyone, especially people in crypto, we're smarter than most, even though there's a lot of not so smart people out there. But people are pretty much bright enough to say, how can I get the best deal? So what they would do is they would watch this HEX pot, EOS pot, but it'll work the same way. And so EOS was trading like a 425 or so, and then magically the EOS pot would level out to 425. Now, from an economic perspective, that just makes sense, because that's supply meeting demand, and it's matching the market price. So you could buy EOS on the market at 425, but you would get plus or minus that in their version of the adoption amplifier. Now, there's going to be, and there was, some similar type of delay between the market realizing this initially and then arbitraging it out to the point where at the end, I think the EOS tokens were being sold within pennies of the Ethereum exchange rate, or within what Satoshis. Yeah, and to the math on that, it looks like day one HEX people, you got your HEX for roughly about 0.27 cents. That's rough math, but around 2/10 of a cent is what you paid, which is going to be a lot of Satoshis. That's going to be a couple hundred Satoshis, right?
Well,
I mean,
it all depends on
the
HEX price, yeah, in Satoshis. But I mean, if you did that on the first day, you basically got wrecked.
Yeah, well, I mean, today you got wrecked today. I mean, the same thing. If you over FOMO'd in day one of EOS, you got super wrecked 2 weeks out. But
today
it went up
is
to
actually
$20.
Going to be their best day if it stays this way. The problem is if a lot of people know about this website, and you could have people waiting to the very end. You just never know. It's a big game of chance. So I know
it is.
It's basically like bringing $100 to the bank and depositing it, but you don't know how much money is going to actually get deposited. It could be $10, or it could be $105, or it could be $70. So
yeah,
I mean, as far as that goes, if he's trying to do something to better society, this is certainly not the best way to distribute HEX, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I have a question for you, but there's one thing I didn't mention that I also think is really important and relevant. Is that at the beginning of HEX's, HEX evolved as an idea. It was originally going to be Bitcoin HEX, and it had some some components behind it. And the adoption amplifier. Here's another interesting thing. The reason why we should bring this up is because this doesn't line up with the scam narrative. Is that the adoption amplifier was an afterthought, like an afterthought. So it really wasn't a part of the initial idea. The initial idea was to gift the HEX to Bitcoin holders, and then the adoption amplifier got added. And it's a very interesting choice to make. But what he did see was obviously EOS did really well, and so why wouldn't I also follow that model? One of the reasons why I would assert that this is a good way to release HEX into the market is because it's driven by market forces. Every single ETH that gets dropped in that bucket is someone in the world who says, sure, it's just like going to the carnival. You just said it's a game of chance, and I wouldn't even disagree with that, although we could probably develop that more. But like, just like people go to Las Vegas with $1,000, they have a good time, and they come home with 150 or negative 200. Same thing as this. Like, every single market participant that has dropped ETH into that ETH bucket, they did it of their own volition. They didn't do it because of any other reason except for they said, why not?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I feel nobody's putting a gun to anybody's head to do anything. But that doesn't mean there's, I'm not even going to say the word scam anymore. I'll just say shady, because the whole project in general to me is shady. Because personally, it's not a scam. Like you said, I can't really argue the legalities of it. I'm not a lawyer, but there was actually an interview with Richard Hart, Tone Vase, and he had a couple lawyers on, and they were going back and forth for several hours. So that's a really good, video for people to watch if they want to understand the legalities behind it with the SEC and is it a security, so on and so forth. Personally, I wouldn't use the word scam, but it's definitely borderline, a shady operation, because if this was a fair distribution model, I would say, all right, there's 500 million HEX in this bucket. we're going to give you a 1-to-1 value. If Ethereum is, say, 2 million Satoshis for the day, you put it in there, boom, and Hex is, say, 1 Satoshi, you get 2 million Hex back. So it's a fair 1-to-1. None of
so
this,
you're essentially an IPO model, right? Like, you're kind of saying it should be. That was my question, by the way. Let me know if this is what you think. Like, so you're essentially thinking it should work similar to an IPO, where there's an IPO price and it gets released at a set price, and it's like, here is what you pay, and then of course that gets released.
Right. I mean, because
investors buy, and then it hits the exchange.
Yeah. I mean, if you went on the market and bought Bitcoin is whatever it is today, we'll say 7,100. You have to transfer $7,100 to get 1 Bitcoin. You can't deposit 5,000 and say, oh, maybe I'll get a Bitcoin, or maybe I'll get a tenth of a Bitcoin, or it's just a big game of chance. So.
And so the question is of expectation. If I send $7,100 to Coinbase expecting to be able to get a Bitcoin, and I can't get that Bitcoin, like I put the money in, but it just disappears and it's gone, and I have no Bitcoin, then obviously I've been defrauded. That is illegal. That was theft because there was no exchange. Everyone understands, though. I really doubt there's anyone smart enough to be able to interact with this smart contract that doesn't understand it's a game of chance. So again, not only are they doing it by their own volition, they're also doing it with the understanding that it's a slot machine, right, that you're putting in your ETH and out comes Hex. But just like the quarter slot machine, you never know if it's going to dump out a ton of money, or if it's just going to dump out what you put in, or if nothing comes out. All those are possibilities when you put your quarter in the slot machine and you pull the lever. But we don't ever call a slot machine a scam. I mean, maybe someone does. But like
with slot machines, who always wins? The house wins. And who's the house?
Well, not always. I mean, the house does win, but that's not entirely true. Who wins in the slot machine? What happens, economically speaking, is that there's an exchange of value. What the player gets every single spin is the dopamine hit that the resulting output of the machine provides. And that's why people keep putting quarters in. They're getting something for their money every time. They're just not getting a jackpot.
Right, but
right?
Dopamine doesn't pay the bills. I mean, it's still...
Oh, no, of course not. But that you don't put money in a slot machine to pay the bills.
Right. But this should not be treated as Las Vegas. These are investments. People put their hard-earned money in these things, and they expect things to grow. And by guaranteeing growth as far, with the staking, as far as whatever it is, thousands of percentage worth of Hex, if Hex isn't worth anything, this is where I get into the point with his word gymnastics. He's guaranteeing the growth percentage-wise in Hex. It's
right.
If Hex has no value, then essentially he's gets away scot-free with essentially all this Ethereum, which a lot of people think he has the control of that wallet.
Well, of course, I'm not even going to mince words. I mean, Richard has some level or degree of control over that wallet. I don't know to what extent. I have no knowledge. Again, I can say things that Richard can't because I don't represent the project. I'm just a guy. But, I understand how a guy like that operates because I've been following him for over a year and a half. And, he's a really smart dude, and I respect him, kind of watched him, studied him. Yeah, I mean, of course he does. But now here's the interesting thing. I mean, that skips ahead the line of ideas that I had floating around my head. But we'll hit it real quick because I think this is a really big sticking point for people. If there was no adoption amplifier, nobody could even call it a scam. I don't think anyone would even care to call it a scam because it's, just redeem if you have Bitcoin if you feel like it. You don't have to. But the adoption amplifier is what makes the whole thing like, oh, we're in scam territory now. So let's think of it this way. I don't know. You got Bitcoin. Let's use Bitcoin. Bitcoin was a pre-mine in the sense that Satoshi has 1 million of them. Right. Never touched them, never moved them, probably never will. But nonetheless, it was a pre-mine, and there are 1 million less available on the market because he did that.
Right.
If you look at Dash, which is really old too, it also was pre-mined. If you look at XRP, the foundation holds 80% of the coins. Is Ripple a scam? Like, no, they bought a ton of MoneyGram. They like, they don't have a controlling interest. Actually,
well, I mean, Ripple bought. You know, people have to separate Ripple from XRP. Is XRP a scam? Probably not. It's along those. You know, it's along that borderline of shady type of things. Personally, I think XRP was created to fund Ripple, the company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just for that. Like that guy just did that to get rich. And
Right.
you know what? I mean, we're not going to go. I mean, we would be here for a while if I really kind of went off on XRP. But I know a lot of people that are spending a lot of money on XRP, and I am really, really, really disappointed. I have a friend who's like a big Bitcoin Ben follower, and like some of these other guys, I don't know who they are. I just know he sends me Bitcoin Ben videos all the time. And I'll tell you the truth, man. Like, I'm very concerned for him because there is no incentive for the Ripple Foundation to help the price of XRP at all.
Exactly.
And if hey, well, if the whole a rising tide raises all ships, there'll be the Ripple Foundation will have a lot more money if their token goes up. But look at what the token's meant for. It's meant for being a carrier of value. It's better for it to be cheap.
Right.
In terms of like for MoneyGram and for those other applications that everyone's so excited about, it's better if it's cheap, right? Because nothing is ever going to capture 100% of the global market without like a global superpower, like a one world government. Like that, nothing else is ever going to let one thing take over all the world's value. MoneyGram, though, if they were to ever use it, which they don't want to use it, but if they ever did, they'd want it to be a cheap transporter of value. And then you have the XRP Foundation. They'd say, oh, we're very transparent. They are dumping it on the market every quarter. They are. How do you expect price to go? Am I going to buy when I know that the biggest bag holder is dumping every quarter?
Right.
I mean, you got to be crazy. But a lot of people are putting a lot of money into Ripple. And Ripple is a lot like that, though, to the point we were making about HEX, is that, they have a huge majority of the supply. As that relates to what we were talking about with Richard, it's, I guess, let's say he's Ripple. He's the Ripple Foundation, right? That's the analog. If he gets all of that ETH and uses every single penny of it to market the living daylights out of HEX on everything from a Super Bowl commercial to the back of a milk cart, right? If he spends every dime just making HEX huge, is it still a scam?
Well, the thing
we can't know, but is it a scam if he spends every bit of those resources on the promotion of the project?
If he was transparent about it from day one, people would be more accepting of that.
But it's illegal for him to do that.
Exactly. That's why he.
And that's the problem. So we can't know, but that's why I made the case for Richard Hart at the man at the beginning, because what we're then left with, since the American government is not going to allow Richard Hart to be transparent, they're going to block him, create barriers to him being transparent with you and me. The best thing we can do, the closest we can approximate, is by literally going back and analyzing this guy's character. And I think the best way to do that is to go back to the oldest videos on his channels, pre-HEX, pre-everything, and really start to make our own case and make our own assumptions for that. Because listen, what was it? What was the other project I heard about recently? I want to say it was... oh man, it wasn't Dash. I was looking at Dash, and it's a blue logo. It's fancy and blue and fun. Digibyte. Yeah. So Digibyte, they have this whole model around paying the foundation for future development. Like they have this kind of hybrid staking mining process where they get funneled money by the protocol. The foundation does for future development.
Digibyte doesn't have any type of proof of stake at all.
Oh,
the
it's all
Digibyte
proof of work.
Foundation is just strictly a separate entity that helps promote Digibyte. Same with the Litecoin Foundation. A lot of
Right,
people
right.
say, "Oh, Litecoin Foundation has no funding," blah blah blah, all that stuff. Litecoin's gonna fail. No, it's two totally separate things. Digibyte, Litecoin, they've been proof of work since day one. They don't have any type of proof of stake or anything where they, distribute funding to the community for helping at all. So if you
Do
want
they
to,
get a portion of the mining
no,
proceeds? Because if not, then
no,
I'm thinking of the wrong project.
no,
But it's
definitely
something.
not. Nope,
The foundation doesn't receive for some of the mining. Okay,
no,
all right.
just strictly
But that is
donations. That's it.
that is a model out there. I guess I'm sorry, Digibyte, if I defamed your name. I mean, technically, it's not defamation because people agree to it. Like, hey, this is our model. Like, every coin that's mined, 10% goes to the foundation.
I
Right?
believe that's. I think Zcash did that, where
Okay.
for the first several years, a lot of the mining went to the initial co-founders. I think it was
Yeah.
Zcash.
So essentially, we're doing the same thing in HEX. We're seeing the same thing play out again. There's a pool of money, a pool of investment money that's going into the foundation. Only the neat thing about HEX is what I think is actually cool. There is no foundation. It's a smart contract, right? So whoever has that ETH, they have nothing to future develop. They have nothing to, there is no need for a future development. I guess there could be possibly, but like all of that could easily be driven by enterprise, community members, business. It could be. It doesn't need to be driven by a foundation. But promoting it, I think Richard Hart makes a really good argument about the promotion of Bitcoin lacking because there's no one who can afford to onboard new users. Now, he's already dumped a lot of money into this, and it totally could fail because it's an entrepreneurial endeavor. So why wouldn't he take the HEX and invest it heavily in promotion of the project to make it as successful as it possibly can be?
Well, he's made it perfectly
Because see,
clear.
that secures future value. It also would make him a hero, so to speak, in the crypto world if he could make something that actually worked. It would prove that he was smarter than Satoshi. I'm being like kind of facetious, but I'm making like ballsy, big, outlandish claims. Like he has so much more to gain by taking that ETH and making HEX amazing than he does to exit scam or like let's say he gets all the HEX. Who's he going to sell it to? Let's say Origin Address gets so rich, but HEX never goes above 1 Satoshi. Like, you know what I mean? There's no value in it unless it works. And so him having all this ETH to make it work would be the best thing for the Origin Address. Now, that means that he has a shared interest with the participants in HEX to make HEX better because he has the biggest bag. Now, and again, all this kind of ends in 350 days, which is another big thing, which I'll briefly mention, is that, adoption amplifier goes away in a year. And the free claim goes away in a year. After that, it's just a token in the wild. It needs to either develop value or die at that point. There's no more fun, fancy games that we can play. There's no more HEX scam videos that are going to be made. It's just going to disappear into the ether. No pun intended. Unless there's actual value there. And
So,
I'm making trash because that was a future point I was going to make. But where's the value in HEX?
Right. So Richard Hart in the past has made it perfectly clear that he's not doing anything for the project. He developed the software, and now it's off in the wild, like you said. So
he's not allowed to if he would. But again, there is no future development to be done. It's a smart contract. It works as intended. It's like triple audited. So it's not like there's ever going to be a bug that needs to come, be addressed later on down the road. There's nothing to do with that.
Well, so, not really development, but promotion and things, all kinds of things like that.
He promises not. Like I can't, for example, I can't promise you that I'm going to eat dinner tonight. I can't make that promise, right? Am I eating dinner tonight? You bet your sweet Bippy I'm eating dinner tonight, right? Like, I don't have to tell you I'm eating dinner tonight. I can tell you plainly I don't promise to you that I'm going to eat dinner tonight, But am I eating dinner? Yeah. So if you apply the same template, he's not legally allowed to say he's going to do future work for his investors. Because like we said, everyone who dumped in an ETH is an investor. They did invest. So is it a security? Well, if he does future work, it starts to look a lot like it. And I'm pretty sure the IRS and or the SEC and or any other government agency that really wants to can find Richard Hart, and I'm sure they can put him in jail. So it is plainly in his best interest to not tell us that he's going to give us no promise. In fact, listen, I would give you no promise as well. I would totally agree with that. But I would love, if I was a good person, I would love to help you out. I would love to make it better for you, right? If you believe in me, if your vote of confidence is in me and you're dumping ETH into my address, man, I'm going to do what I can to make it worth your while. And so for it to be a scam, a fraud, for it to be not kosher, we're basically saying that Richard Hart has poor intent. He has ill intent. And I know factually, no one can prove he has ill intent. In fact, all the evidence points that he has good intent. So again, because it's illegal for him to say what's going to happen with these ETH tokens in the future, or the ETH tokens in the future, does not mean he's not going to do wonderful things that you and I would be very, very happy about in terms of promotion of the product in the future. So I think it's something really to be considered. I think it, again, adds to the mounting pile of evidence that it is not a scam. I think it sucks that it is the way it is, because I totally get it. But then again, does it really? Because like I said, who would be talking about HEX if there wasn't like a scam component? If there wasn't a scam to talk about, why would, what are people drawn to? Good news or bad news? So if HEX is bad news, is that better for press or worse for press? It's better for press.
Right.
Does he? I think we all really have to be careful and each for our own individual satisfaction investigate our personal assessment of the intent of Richard Hart in order to really quantify whether we believe it's ill or not. Because if he has ill intent and is not going to do anything but get rich off this project and watch it go to zero, well, if he's going to do that, then I think that there's going to be clues that he's that kind of person in some of his other public releases, right?
Right.
Another thing where he gets a lot of criticism is he was a Bitcoin maximalist that fell in love with Ethereum and not a Bitcoin maximalist anymore, and now he's like an altcoin shill, an altcoin founder. Like, listen, I think we like to put people in their boxes. So once Richard Hart was in the maximalist box, we liked him. If you were a maximalist, at least, because he fit neatly in your box. Well, he left the box, and now he's not a Bitcoin maximalist anymore, right? That should be allowed. That should be allowed for him to evolve that opinion in terms of saying, like, hey, I think ETH is actually doing really good things. Now, I don't feel great about the price of ETH at all myself. I don't know about you, but with all these, all this money, all this ETH that's out there waiting to get dumped, I mean, just sitting. I mean, then again, I guess you can't feel good about Bitcoin's price either, about the same metric, because holy crap, plus token. Although I did read from Chain Analysis that they did largely use OTC. So if they use OTC, price should be reasonably safe if they dump that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of Ethereum. I just think that the development behind it is. I mean, they recently had a hard fork like last week or 2 weeks ago. They have to do another hard fork in early January because of bad development.
Yeah, so, I mean, well, this stuff is nearly impossible to develop. So God bless them all for figuring it out. I am starting to wade pretty deep in the waters of PineScript coding on TradingView, and which is laughable if you know how to program. But I'm like struggling, man. I'm like, boy, I can't imagine trying to develop this crap in general. I think it's remarkable the amount of intelligence and the logic and all the things that can go wrong, and they have gone wrong. I mean, particularly in Ethereum, they've gone wrong for certain developers who didn't do it right. Yeah, and for Bitcoin too, because of the inflation bugs. So, yeah, again, these things are not scammed. Like Bitcoin was a pre-mine. Bitcoin had bugs. Bitcoin dropped 90%. Was it a scam?
There's no
So
centralized authority behind it, though. Now, if Richard's going to have a lot of hex, from what I've found, he's probably going to have about 50% of hex. If I'm
yeah, 50%.
All right, and then he has an entire shit ton of Ethereum to go along with that.
Correct.
Now, if
Yep.
he's going to use that Ethereum to promote hex in the future, build
Let's
it
say.
up, do whatever he wants to do, then he becomes a centralized entity of hex. And he's been saying how hex is more decentralized than Bitcoin, and so you
Mining.
can't have.
He's talking about mining. Mining is because it's on Ethereum, and Ethereum is more decentralized than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's highly centralized.
So hex itself, the project, is centralized or decentralized?
Hex being on the Ethereum blockchain is more decentralized. The centralization of the protocol and centralization of the wealth they got to be separated because they're different.
Right.
Him having 50% ownership of all the Hex, that is not. Well, I mean, that's not very decentralized. It definitely isn't. But you could look at it like, for example, Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin highly centralized? Because there's 9 pools, and they do like 80% of the Bitcoin creation,
Right.
and most of them are in China. So they're geographically centralized, they're numerically centralized, and as a result, we can look at that project and say, wow, Bitcoin is pretty centralized. Now, you can attack that argument because within a pool, there's many miners, right?
Right.
And in the same way, you can attack the argument that Richard Hart owning 50% is highly centralized. Here's something really neat about the fact that he owns, let's say he owns 51%, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know who else owns 51% of their project the day that it was released for public investment? Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, but then now you have a
Jeff
centralized
Bezos
project.
owned 51% of Amazon the day of its IPO.
Right, but Jeff Bezos isn't selling you on thousands of percent gain in the future.
Well, no, he was. Oh, yeah, absolutely was. Have you ever read the Everything Store?
As a guarantee?
No.
Well,
no, but then again, neither is
guaranteed.
Hex. Hex is saying
He's
it's
guaranteed.
designed to, right?
So
with no promises given.
Right. So now he's using word gymnastics. He's basically.
Well, no, but then Jeff Bezos did the same thing. Then in that case, then Jeff Bezos made the exact same promises. He ran cash flow negative for decades, or what seemed like decades. The guy made no profits forever, and he ran to investors. Before he went to public, he ran to investors constantly. He built every penny he could out of everyone in his family. He flew all over the country, meeting with the biggest investment firms in the world, and he kept asking for millions and millions, like absurd numbers he was asking for, stupid numbers, given the size of his company. He was asking for a lot of money. And the investors, if you go and you talk, I guess it might be in the Everything Store, or at least in some other book on that Amazon story. The investor said, like, yeah, the idea, like, I get it. It made no sense. It sounded like a really dumb investment. But when you talk to Jeff, you just couldn't help but think that this guy really, really believed what it was he was selling. So, Jeff Bezos did the exact same thing. He owned 51% of the company at release of the IPO, and he cashed out all of his investors, if I remember correctly, and converted that stock into the IPO stock. He really did. He totally 51% owned everything. He ran cash flow negative, which in business is garbage business. Like, you don't do that, you die. You don't have cash, you die. So he kept on getting new cash, new money, new ETH dumped in his bucket. And he kept on working, right? And he did promise his investors that this thing one day is going to be huge. I mean, we talk about Jeff Bezos because he's a winner. He won. His thing worked. But the same thing happened at WeWork. WeWork wasn't a scam. They did do a lot of legal things, but this guy did the same thing, ran around, hey, give me money, give me money, give me money. I'm going to make this huge, amazing business. People were enamored by it, enamored by him. They invested. Now WeWork is worth diddly squat because it was garbage business. So that is really where our conversation leads us then, I think, is to, does HEX have value? And I think that's a fundamental question, right? His investors aren't getting scammed. They're entering of their own volition. He, to me, my assessment is he's a man of good intent. I think he wants good things with the world. And I don't think he wants to hurt people by scamming them for their money. There are better ways to do it that are more profitable, more anonymous. And he knows all those things because he's been in the back corners of the web since the beginning of time. So if he was looking to scam people, he would be very smart to do it anonymously. And he'd probably make a lot more money that way. So I really believe his intent is pure. HEX is not a scam for free claimers, and the ETH people are entering of their own volition. So the real question is, where does it go? Does HEX have any value as the CD of the blockchain, the first CD of the blockchain? I think that's honestly the weakest point in the whole ladder. In terms of my argument, HEX is not a scam. I feel like I can state that imperatively with plenty of proof. Mm-hmm. But if someone said to me, hey, I'd like you to come on a stream and I'd like you to defend the argument HEX has value, that's harder. Yeah.
So if basically what it comes down to is HEX is, if it's going to be anything in the future, it's going to be centralized because Richard has so much of it. And now if you have everybody's best interest in hand, why would you need to have 50% of something? And why? Well,
to have control, right?
Exactly. So,
yeah, I mean, and that was Jeff Bezos' strategy as well. He wanted to keep control of his company while, because no one loved Amazon, and probably that's still true. No one, I mean, maybe my wife loves Amazon more than Jeff Bezos, but yeah, no one loved it more than him. It was his baby. He wasn't going to give up control. And yeah, I mean, you can make the argument Richard's doing the same thing, but is that a bad thing? Well, it depends. Is he a good businessman or not? Because if he's a good businessman, he cares about his business. Or at least the thing he created. It's a different world now. The analogs don't work perfect because this thing's out in the wild with or without him. Like you said, if he dies, if Jeff Bezos died in 1997, like he'd have been screwed. But like he didn't, and he, was able to build a business. Richard could die tomorrow, and literally HEX just runs. I think it's kind of amazing because it's not reliant on him, although he is the biggest holder. So. The question is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? And you think it's a bad thing.
I think it's terrible for what is HEX's use case? Is it supposed to be a currency?
Right. That is a good question. It's supposed to be a CD. That's the idea. But what is a certificate of deposit? What is that? That is money that you take to the bank and say, hey, I don't need this for a long time. You hold it and give me money. Like you're borrowing the bank money. Is what you're doing. It's the biggest ripoff ever of borrowing the bank money because you'll barely get anything over prime. But yeah, that's the idea. So this is the blockchain CD. And so you're going to see me struggle here because I'm still kicking this around at how this could work in an actual real world, not in crypto world, because sure, Doge still has value and it's the joke coin. XRP has value even though they dump on their holders every single quarter. Like all these things in crypto that have value, it's absurd because they, like ADA, what have they done like that merits any value at all? It's a great idea. And I think the founder is a smart dude and I think he's a good guy too, but there's no value there. So in order for something to have value, there has to be value creation from the economic inputs. So your basic economic inputs of land, labor, and capital have to go into a process. And in that process, value has to be added to those raw materials. And then that item can have value if the value you added is of value to other participants. So why does a CD have value?
Why does HEX have value?
You're
Not
giving
so much a CD.
right, and that's so the CD would have value at the bank because you're giving the bank money. They're going to take your money and they're going to make money. What it does is it goes into what's called their reserves. It goes onto their balance sheet as a liability and an asset. Most people, I think Richard recently said that it goes on their bank sheet as a liability, but it actually has to go on their books as cash because you gave them cash, and that's an asset column. And then it goes in the liability column, but it goes in the liability column at its present value, not its future value, because of accrual accounting, which I'm not going to dive down that deep in the rabbit hole. But essentially, the bank makes more money on the money from the CD, the initial deposit, than you will. Right, You're basically stacking their reserves, and they're going to give you 1%, and they're going to make 3, 5, 7, 12% on that money. They keep the difference as their profit and return the money to you. And that's the value. However, I get the value of getting a higher interest rate than my savings account.
Right.
But you get the value.
Oh, go ahead. So you're depositing HEX to stake. The HEX.
Burning it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You basically, for anybody not familiar with it, if you lock up your HEX, basically the entire fund is burned, and you get it all back at the end of your staking period. The thing is, now you have to actually convert Ethereum, which has value, it's $130, into HEX, which again you're playing that game of chance. Maybe you get 60, 70% less value, maybe it's 10% less value, and you're taking that HEX, which has less value than what you initially deposited in Ethereum, and staking that. When you actually do a CD in a bank, you deposit $100. You're not depositing $100 and turning it into $40 worth of Bank of America coin.
Yeah. It's a new paradigm, though, right? This is not even supposed to be theoretically possible. And that I could get paid interest. Like you can't get paid interest without value creation. This is like the only real weak point, and it's not weak yet. It's just an unknown. There needs to be more has to happen for this to really get fleshed out because it's never been done before. That's the way a CD traditionally works. These people that are contributing the ETH and they're getting out the HEX, they then stake their HEX, which burns it, and they're credited shares by the smart contract. When their stake ends, they redeem the shares and it remints your equivalent value in HEX, and then you can do whatever you want with your HEX, right? So it's the same thing as a CD. If you touch your CD while it's locked up, you get penalized heavily. If you touch your stake while it's locked up, you get penalized heavily. And so that's the analog. And it's a fitting analog except for this one thing. The bank, they have the asset of your cash, and they create value for themselves. It's a profit motive for them. And that's important because they're a bank. They're here to make money. However, there doesn't really need to be a profit motive for the HEX smart contract because it's just a smart contract. It doesn't need to make money, right? So it's a very interesting difference that, yes, the way a CD would work is that it goes into the bank, they make more money than you do, they give you a little piece of it.
Right.
The way HEX works is it goes in. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But you're putting value into the bank in a CD to get value back. If you're staking HEX and HEX has no value, what are you getting out of it?
Exactly. You get nothing, right? Which is essentially you dropping your quarter in the slot machine and nothing comes out, right? You're going to have to check the next slot machine, drop another ETH in the next bucket that someone offers. But yeah, you get nothing. So really, that's now that we've migrated beyond the idea of scam or not scam, I think the more interesting conversation, the one that's not being had, is the one of is there value there? And that's why I dive into this idea of here's how a CD works. What would HEX have to do in order to have some level of equivalency? in terms of, it has to relate back to the value creation of HEX, because if HEX does not create value to the end user, then it absolutely is just interest denominated in HEX, and yeah, it will go up 10,000 X in HEX, which, I guess you can't go lower than 1 Satoshi, but maybe no one will even buy that. It's like selling your BitConnect tokens. I don't think there's much of a market for those. It can go to 0, and it won't if there's value there.
Well,
so that's
what's
the
value
big question.
Creation in HEX? If HEX has no creation value, then it's worthless. So by staking HEX in a CD, essentially it's not the same as a CD. All you're so basically you take an Ethereum, you send it to Richard, or we'll
Richard. We'll just say we'll send it to Richard. We won't dance.
And he
sends you're getting it, Richard. We're sending you some ETH.
Yeah.
We love you.
Have it. He sends you back a coupon book.
Yeah.
And you're staking your coupon book now. If the coupon book has no value, then you basically paid Richard to give you a coupon book that's worthless, and you'll have more coupon books at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, let's make this fun and be like, let's pretend that I get McDonald's coupons out of it, but McDonald's goes out of business at the end of my 10-year stake.
Exactly.
Like, 9 years in, McDonald's is out of business, and now I just have these coupons. There's no McDonald's to redeem them at, right? So, the good news is that we know that as long as Ethereum's around, and even still, they can migrate to another chain, but, we'll assume Ethereum's going to be around in 10 years. So in 10 years, Ethereum's still around, HEX is still going to be around.
But
so we don't have to worry about it going out of business. But where is the value, right?
Right.
Do I understand that right?
So going back to that point real quick about being built on Ethereum. If Ethereum moves to proof of stake, how will HEX do its its proof of work algorithm for its transactions?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it may be, what if they go to proof, like, what if Richard is bright enough to have realized I'm going to need to be staking something in the future in order to use the network? Maybe I want a big stack of ETH so I can stake when that day comes. I'd be pretty smart. It'd be forward thinking, because we do know that Vitalik wants to move to proof of stake. It seems like there's support for the community and the development team in that effort. So he kind of needs a big stack of ETH to stake should that day come.
Yeah, for himself.
Well, but it's staked. He can't, if he's using it for proof of stake, he can't unstake it or he breaks HEX.
Right.
So like it would be dead money to him. It would be his, but it'd be dead money. And I don't think there's anything great going on for future price appreciation of ETH, because you can literally do this kind of thing where you just create a coin, collect ETH for it, and dump on the market. And that's why ETH got so battered and bruised in the bear market of 2018. That's why it got eviscerated compared to Bitcoin, because there was all this ETH and all these development projects. And that doesn't change in the future if we pull out and move into a bull market again.
Yeah.
You can still create an ERC20, accept ETH for it, and dump it on the market. So there's not a lot of good things to really talk about in terms of ETH price future. I think it's a good point. If it does go proof of stake, I never even thought of that, but that immediately comes to me. I'm like, oh, wow, that would be why Richard would need a big fat stack of ETH sitting around, so he could stake it to the network if they go proof of stake.
But then he says he's not, he doesn't own possession of that Ethereum.
Well, he said he's not. I think, I don't want to say of course he does. I don't want to get sued for libel. Don't sue me, Richard. I can't prove it, but it's like everyone else says. Of course he has the keys. You know what I mean? Maybe he's setting up a trust fund for his grandmother or something. But what did he say? The priest in Africa? Maybe the priest in Africa. Yeah. I'm sure that's a movie reference. I just don't know a movie reference to what. But yeah, so he's going to get this ETH. He's got all this ETH. He's going to be getting it for the next year. He's going to have a huge stack of it. If that goes to promote the project, if it goes to benefit, because listen, he's going to have a lot more HEX than he has ETH. So if the price of HEX goes up through him spending the ETH and HEX goes up, then that's way better for him than to just cash out on the ETH, right? And I think he believes, and I mean, you can agree or disagree, I think he believes genuinely that he's smart enough to cause price inflation in HEX. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying I think he really thinks HEX can go high in price. So the ETH is worthless to him. compared to how much HEX he has. HEX goes to whatever the price of ETH today. It goes to, like, let's say it turns into the next maker coin, the maker DAI thing. If it turns into something like that, oh my God, like, he's so much better off having his big stack of HEX than he is to have those ETH. Those ETH are garbage in comparison if the project works. So I think that the big thing is, does HEX have value? And I actually did pull a little bit of notes because I'm not on top of my game to really be able to explain this with off the top of my head. But here's what I assert HEX has created. HEX has created an economy. It's not a coin. It's not a currency. It's not a single entity thing. What he did was create an economy. And what he did in the creation of this economy is different from Bitcoin because it has structure to it. The economy has one little feature that economies in the 21st century require, and that is an interest rate, a fixed interest rate. Now that, and of course I don't want to sound, I do think that Richard sometimes is too mean to the people listening to him. Like, for God's sake, bro, we're giving you our attention. Don't insult us on top of it, right? But I understand why he does. He's a very smart guy. Stupidity can be very, very frustrating. Nonetheless, I don't want to say that that's way above everyone else's head. But if you guys want a rabbit hole that'll twist your mind up for a couple of years, you go ahead and dive into the interest rate impacts of the economy. And that is like worse than Google's web crawler. All the impacts that interest rates have all across the global economy is amazing. Now, what did Bitcoin do? Bitcoin had inflation. And of course, HEX does as well. But now we don't just have inflation, we have interest. And that is a very, very interesting development in my mind, because those are your basic necessities in creation of an economy. Now,
but is inflation a good thing?
Say it again.
Is inflation a good thing? That's Bitcoin's main thing.
So it depends on how you look at it. I can really go on that because the 21 million supply cap in Bitcoin is code. They can change the code. But sorry, especially as centralized as it is, they just got to get together and agree.
But I don't think that would basically be the Bitcoin holders killing their cash cow. We'll say that.
Right. What would likely happen is it would be a fork, right? There would be a division. Not everyone would agree. People would be scared they're killing the cash cow. Other people would say we have no other way to do it. No future guarantee of how we're going to be able to pay our mining bills, right? Transaction fees aren't going to be enough because the hash rate just keeps getting bigger, which means the transaction fees keep getting bigger, which means that the price of or the interest in people transacting in is going to be lower, which means the transaction fee, like there's the whole equilibrium set at work there. And Bitcoin is just, oh God, I mean, the block timing and the hash rate adjustments and all that stuff is very fascinating. But is inflation a good thing, to address the question directly? Well, it has brought on the last 120 years of the greatest period of economic development humankind has ever experienced on any level. The only thing that even came close was when the Egyptians had slaves, right? Free labor was apparently a really good way to develop your economy. If you don't pay your people and you kill them if they don't work, it's effective. And but outside of that, there has not been any type of economic development on this scale since just so happens to coincide with around the time we started measuring interest rates or charging interest rates, right? And some money nerds gonna be like, no, there was interest in the blah blah blah. Listen, y'all get the point, right? Like, we have been running a Keynesian economy for the last 100 years, and we don't have to like Keynesian economics, but we can look to the left and the right and at the neighbor across the street, and we've done really well. We've done really, really well. Now there's a finite end to all that. But yeah, interest is great. Inflation is okay. there's nothing wrong with inflation as long as, like, for example, in the United States economy, as long as wages go up. If wages go up with the inflation, no problem. Where we ran into a problem with inflation in the United States here is that because of the 2008 crisis, which was brought on by over leverage, we then end up with a problem of needing to print money. That's the Keynesian way, is we now quantitative easing.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that did was created a massive wage gap, right? Well, not in and of itself. I'm oversimplifying for the sake of time. But like essentially we ended up with a wage gap because we overinflated too fast. And that's the way it's been slow since the 50s. It's been happening, but it's accelerating at a rapid pace, and that's because of 2008. So inflation is fine, and it's a good way for HEX to function because it doesn't really have any other way of producing interest unless we actually have an entity that is going to get to work, taking the money that is in the entity and creating additional value on top of it. But as an economy, all HEX is really missing. Well, that's an extreme statement. One of the things that's missing is participants, right? So if you and I, you got HVAC business, I want a sub from you. I'm a painter. I don't know why HVAC guy would have paint contracts, but just say you do. And I want a sub from you. And I agree, you can pay me in HEX, right? Like if you want to just pay the contract in HEX, I'll get the work done. Now, if you and I start doing that with a network of contractors, because you know how connected contractors are, we all do business together.
Right.
And so like we all just start transacting in HEX because it works for us, right? Now, what we've done is we are now economic participants in the HEX ecosystem, right? And so that's what HEX really needs, I think, in order for it to have future value, like permanent future value. Amazon dropped 95%, but he was building real value. It solves all of my Christmas shopping problems. And so I love it, right? So that's what Jeff Bezos has done for me. And that's why I give him my money. And that's why we buy his stock, because he's doing these things that have created a value chain throughout the Western world, or at least America. And that value chain connects raw inputs, adds value, and then there's outputs that we get to benefit from. So HEX does that by paying you interest in HEX, but at the same time, like to your point, what's the value in that? So what I really see HEX is as an economy. And if we were to judge it as an economy, we would be looking at creating a GDP for it, right? So a GDP is consumption, investment, and its natural resources, or net exports. That's what it is. Consumption, investment, and net exports added together is what makes a GDP. What do we have for consumption? Well, we have people that are engaging in a contract, but that doesn't really qualify as consumption. To be consumption, we need to start trading it with one another on a non-exchange traded basis. This is very easy to do, although it does require gas, right? So if we had a way of eliminating gas, it could really be a frictionless payment system, of course, limited by the Ethereum network's throughput. But again, that's supposed to be drastically increasing. So technically it's positioned to capitalize on throughput increases on the Ethereum network in the future. And if we have all the throughput we need, then we could start creating an economy within HEX. And if we were able to do that, then it would have real value to us, right? But other than that, it's just a speculative instrument like anything else.
Right.
Yeah. And so it gets deep there.
I don't have, I'll be honest, I don't have an issue with HEX at all. The HEX, the software, I'll say that. So right. The smart contract, there's many of them out there. It is nice that it's the first, they call it CD on the blockchain. We can agree to disagree on that. But as far as the centralization of the asset itself, that's everyone's main concern. I don't think their issue is with HEX, the software, the project. their issue is with Richard Hart being the centralized holder of most of the HEX and this whole Ethereum thing.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's reasonable because we all have to make that decision. I'm a big fan, well, I don't know, maybe former fan. I haven't watched him in so long, of Gary Vaynerchuk.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I really like that Gary Vaynerchuk talks about when he talks about making investments for himself is that he likes to bet on the jockey, not the horse. And
Right.
what he means by that is the operator of the startup is a bigger component to him than whether the idea is great. Right. So he could have a great idea, poor execution, the great idea loses every time. And so I tend to think the same way. So we all have to make that judgment. And I think you more or less nailed it there with what we don't really have a problem with the smart contract because, geez, I mean, why would you get in a fight with a smart contract?
Yeah, I mean, that's
silly.
It's in the code.
But Richard, we could have a problem with Richard, and just like I could have a problem in a lot. You can use your advanced features on Google. Go back and read analysis of Amazon in the early days before we all knew it was going to go up to $2,000 a share. Like there were some blistering analyses of Jeff Bezos's operation, right? And there was a lot of people who really hated him. He really went up and he destroyed Barnes and Nobles, he destroyed Borders, he destroyed Walmart, and these were very large, powerful companies, and they had high incentive to hold him down and keep him back. The problem was he just executed so well and they were so slow that he won anyway. But given the size of Walmart, if you remember Walmart in the 90s, given the strength of Starbucks, before Starbucks, we had Barnes and Nobles. Like Barnes and Nobles was the spot to sit and get coffee, right? Read your books. And they just looked at Jeff Bezos, little Mr. Jeff Bezos, and they said, yeah, sure, buddy.
Yeah.
Right? And that was just on the book topic. That was just on the bookstore aspect. But Jeff Bezos saw something the rest of the world didn't. And those that bet against him, like, they didn't get wrecked. They were safe. They were totally safe. They never lost a dime because they never bet on them, right? And that's totally fine. What we call that is your opportunity cost, right? Your opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from choosing one alternative over another. So if you decide that, like, to your point that, like, I don't really like this centralized ownership, which, again, that's the reason why we didn't like Amazon. I don't really know that I can trust Richard. He's very not transparent. A lot of people didn't think that little Mr. Harvard Bezos, that he was worth the lick. Just because you went to Harvard doesn't mean you knew squat about running a business, right?
Right.
And dropped out of Harvard too, I think, if I remember right. Yeah, so Harvard dropout. That's the narrative. What a loser. Richest man in the world. So by avoiding HEX, let's say you didn't have Bitcoin at the snapshot date, and I wouldn't have, except for I made some transitions out of the into Bitcoin, shifted them to the wallet. Very, very quick, easy process, but was able to grab myself a nice, sizable free claim. Which you could do if you were paying attention to the project. The guy announced. He announced on Twitter, on YouTube, on his calls channels. Like, he announced everything 1,000 times, and the project took a year longer than it was supposed to. So, like, everyone had every opportunity they could ever ask or dream of to have Bitcoin in an offline wallet, even if, like me, I'm not really a no-coiner, but I didn't have any Bitcoin in a wallet, right?
Right.
I'm a trader. So I take the exchange risk a lot. So I had all the runway in the world to get on the project if you wanted a free claim. I'm sorry, I went too far down the opportunity cost. So now you didn't. And so, they you now are faced with a position where you have to put in ETH or buy on exchange to make an investment. That is true. That is accurate. You could have had it for free. If you didn't, it's more or less on you because you totally could have. You just had to pay attention. If not, no problem. you can decide to invest real value, which is ETH, rather than real time, which is what I did, and you can make an investment. You can look at the whole thing, say it looks scammy. I saw Box Mining. He sounded like a brilliant guy. I roll. And I think I can trust what he has to say on the topic. And yeah, I'm not going to invest. Well, if HEX works out really, really well, you lose nothing, but you also gain nothing. And that's your opportunity cost. So I think everyone has to assume their own opportunity cost. And I can't judge you for putting ETH in the bucket if you want. You can't. If I decided to drop $1,000 on putting ETH into the HEX bucket, like, who's going to judge me for it? What am I throwing $1,000 away? Sure, but like, how many easy ways are there to throw away $1,000?
Yeah,
there's a lot of easy ways.
It is all on the end user. You know, we have nobody to blame but ourselves for anything, right. Any type of investment that we make. So everybody has to do their own research and come to their own conclusions.
Yeah. And so the convenience, there's another idea out there, and it's called convenience yield. Convenience yield is a significant part of this idea, which everyone's talking about, stock to flow ratio.
Oh, don't even get me started on that.
Please, someone shoot me in the head, right? God almighty. Anyway, convenience yield, though, is a real thing. And the convenience yield essentially is the value of holding something versus getting rid of something. It refers heavily to commodities, or principally to commodities, but then is over applied to gold because of its high stock to flow. Mm-hmm. But essentially, your convenience yield is when I have a Bitcoin and I'm going to hold that Bitcoin, even though it represents $7,000 worth of value. I'm going to hold it because the yield of me holding it is greater than the yield of me spending it. Mm-hmm. It's why HODL exists, right? Because the value of holding it is greater than spending it. And that is a great use case for Bitcoin as a store of value. Right. I do like it as a store of value, personally. You don't have to agree with that. But and it does clearly have a real convenience yield. The way a company does it, they say, hey, we buy a lot of copper. What is the cost? What is our fixed and variable costs and overhead combined in order to have a warehouse full of copper? Mm-hmm. Well, here's that number. We know that number. We can calculate it. Well, what is the cost of buying a futures contract at a specified price? Because we don't need it for 6 months. And then the convenience yield is the convenience of building the warehouse, storing it, or buying the futures contract, and then saving that money, right? So it kind of like dictates how wrecked you can get if you're like Alcoa or Coca-Cola, mm-hmm. or somebody like that. You know, you're limiting your risk. But in Bitcoin, it's the HODL strategy, right? HODL?
Yeah, I don't know how people say it. They say it both ways. But I think I read somewhere that if you buy Bitcoin and you hold it for at least 4 years, there's basically never a negative return on it. So personally, I think it's the best store of value in crypto. I think that's probably its best use case, and maybe even its only use case. I don't really like Bitcoin at all as a means of exchange. I mean, it's way too slow. It's too boggy. It's expensive. There's plenty of other things like that for that.
Centralization is becoming an increasing risk, which I'm really, and also the supply is almost too low. You know what I mean? Like once you figure out lost coins and Satoshi's stuff and the plus token bonds, you start like 16% roughly. I think someone said 7, but then I read somewhere else 16%. Crypto is being held on exchanges. You got BitMEX that's inflating the supply because of paper Bitcoin. Like I can go into the risks of Bitcoin all day long. I think just for the value of anyone who is watching or who may watch this in the future, like your real risk in Bitcoin right now is derivatives, and it has been since derivatives launched.
Yep.
The reason is because when you take a derivative, it is generally on margin. It is not frequently like, oh, well, I'm going to spot buy a derivative.
Mm-hmm.
And if I buy a Bitcoin, I can pay you for services rendered. I can keep it in the bank. I can lose it. I can forget about it. It doesn't matter what happens, right? I can do whatever I want. It's my Bitcoin. If I have a derivatives contract, it has to stay on that exchange, right, as collateral.
Right.
And my buy, the buy that, is now 10 times bigger because I have the 10 times margin, and I smashed the order book and I got slippage and I kind of bumped it over resistance level, and that was fun. Like that buy pressure on the market necessarily must become sell pressure in the future, because you can't cash out, enjoy any of the gains you made unless you create sell pressure.
Right, exactly.
Now, this is a good thing in efficient markets. It's what makes the commodities work really well, because you can't just huddle commodities, hoard them, drive the prices up, and then force the market to pay whatever you want. They call it was a big deal back in the early 1900s. For those of you that have read Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, he outlines it in detail, how you can corner a market and you can force price up. Yeah, so like it's good for efficient markets that derivatives exist, but it is the biggest threat to your bag of Bitcoin price ever, because I can sell as easy as I can long. And I hi to any of the guys that are in my group. Not my group. I just kind of help serve as one of the leaders, not the principal leader, but of a really fantastic group of traders through Discord. We're kind of like a public group, but no one advertises. We're just a group of friends mostly, but we're a pretty big group. Yeah. And anyway, so we were talking about this in terms of the risk of derivatives, and everyone in my group, and I'm sure in your groups as well that you watch, everyone's as happy to short as they are long. Like, no one gives a crap if Bitcoin really goes. I mean, most people aren't even zoomed out beyond the 4-hour time frame. We're all looking at the 15-minute time frame, right? And we're sitting there with our 10x, 50x, 25x button, and we're ready to smash the daylights out of a short. And great, we're pumped because we got a gain on that trade. That gain on the trade is all we care about, right? So when you have all these participants that all are involved in the Bitcoin arena, the trading arena, the pit, right? If we're all in the trading pit for Bitcoin, no one gives a crap about what the price does. Everyone cares about making money. Well, when you could only buy, that was awesome, because price just could only go up, right? Now we can make money down too. So do I care about up, or do I care about making money?
Yeah.
Well, the guys who are hodling, they only care about it going up. But for anybody trading it, I'm just as happy to see the price go to $1, because that'll be a hell of a short.
Yeah. But we definitely went down a really good rabbit hole here. You're very knowledgeable, and I'm very happy I had you on. But just to wrap up HEX, basically, I would say you're investing in Richard. So if you have to look at all aspects, you can't get we'll call it an airdrop. You can't get the airdrop anymore, and you have to understand that it is a gamble. If you put the Ethereum in the adoption amplifier, you could end up with less value or more value based on how many people put in for that day. So you have to take that into consideration. You have to also take into consideration the amount of HEX that Richard has. You have to take into consideration the Ethereum he has. There's also a emergency end stake feature, which he's said before that if you don't know how to properly use it and you do the emergency end stake, you could potentially lose all your HEX. So I mean,
do not unstake it.
Yeah, you have to be very careful. It's not a scam. I mean, that word gets like loosely thrown around.
Just a bit.
It's definitely borderline. It could be a little shady. I personally won't be investing in HEX because of these, the centralized aspect of it.
Yeah.
I don't think you can have an economy that's based around one person like that, because, you wouldn't, to go back to Jeff Bezos, you wouldn't use Amazon stocks to trade between each other. So
this is the fun part: is that you're absolutely correct. That is so right. You're so right. But the thing is that and it's why I'm here. It's why I exist in crypto. And I mean, I don't have an audience, or I don't have a big following or anything. But like, that's why I'm here. Is like because all these things, these new things, are possible. Like, do it. Like, I think this is the funnest question ever.
mm-hmm.
Does HEX need to create value from the stake, being that it's being staked by an entity that has no need to generate profit?
Right.
Like, typically, yeah, it has to generate value. So there has to be enough profit motive moving around for everyone to gain out of the situation. But I'm not saying yes or no. I would say thank you for having me on very much. Also, thank you for raising awareness because you're right. Don't unstake early. Make sure that you understand you are putting your money in a slot machine. I mean, what's an ETH, right? I mean, I guess an ETH is a lot of money to some people. But, if it's a lot of money to you, you shouldn't be trading with it anyway. You shouldn't be, I'm working very hard myself on some background stuff. I'd like to be able to help people really understand trading properly. Something Al Brooks says that I love and will forever quote is he says, trade the I don't care size. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to the I don't care size being like, I don't care what happens to this, any more than that, and if you care a lot after you invested, in terms of like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't lose, like you invested too much. So keep that in mind as a threshold. Another thing which I'll add to what you were saying is think about, like, I wouldn't take your eye off the project. I wouldn't ignore it. I wouldn't sleep on it, right? So keep an eye on it. Thing is after day 350, the adoption amplifier is gone. The exact supply is known. We're all going to know how much the origin address has received. So all those answers will come on, I think, day 351. Yeah, and so like if you're hesitant, you can do a couple things. You can take the time to watch a bunch of old Richard Hart videos, which I recommend because they're great. And they're not all HEX-centric. They're all very HEX-centric now. They were much more fun when they were more just like, topically diverse. But, dig into him as a person. Discern for yourself his intent. I believe it's good. I think he's a good person. And I say that as a very good person myself. But no, I mean, I really am. I'm not trying to perpetuate the scam. I really want to help people. And the risk, the reason why I kind of go to bat for him on Twitter, because number one, it's not a scam. It's factually incorrect. And I don't want to be rude, which I'm more on if you're out there calling it a scam because you can't demonstrate it on any qualitative or quantitative basis. So you're wrong. And I hate inaccuracy. That's why I'm an accountant, right? Accountants, that's their game. But the other reason why I'm kind of going to bat for it on Twitter is because there is an opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost of straight up disregarding it, especially if you can free claim, to me it seems high, right? Because if Richard does what I think he will, and if he is a good person, and if he really does want the best for HEX, I really think, given his history of success, we would be ill-advised, and his success specifically as a marketer. And what is crypto's biggest problem right now? Marketing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be ill-advised to ignore the project, but I could totally understand someone not wanting to throw money in the bucket to see what comes out, and dealing with illiquid, random, unknown exchange. Like, I get all that, but like, keep an eye on it. See what they do with it, because I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep my eye on it. Like I said, I'm not going to invest in it because I'm a little concerned about certain topics. But yeah, I mean, if you do invest in it, you're essentially investing in Richard. Him as the person and the centralized entity behind HEX. Whether you like him or not, that's basically your decision to come to. Like I said, I like some of the things that he brings up. I like his points. He's a very smart individual. I just find this. Actually, I wanted to bring up one thing real quick. So, those trading bots that they used to have on Telegram? Arbitrage bots and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I actually did one of those last year. And I went into it knowing that it's like I said, I don't want to throw the word scam out there, but I went in there knowing that it's probably eventually going to collapse, and my hope is that I get out before it collapses. So I went in knowing that, and what happened? It collapsed before I got out. That's all on me. That's my fault. You know, so
and it was an arbitrage bot. Yeah, I've called several of those out, like on media and in different places, where I'm like, because the thing that no one understands about the arbitrage market is that it's too small and there's too many players, right? You can't. There's actually not a lot of. They call it arbitrage. Well, not because it's so thin, but it is. It is thin. It is very, very thin. And if it's so easy to do, there's going to be 150 people doing it. You know. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you lost money in that.
Well, I mean,
you're right. If you would have got out ahead of time,
yeah,
it could have been good for you as an individual. Personally,
I mean, I got in knowing that more than likely I would lose what I had in there. But you know, that's the same thing with HEX. You have to go. If you feel that this is one of those type of things, if you want to call it a scam or shady or whatever you want to call it, you can't get out. So you have to be 100% sure on the project. You have to be 100% sure on Richard. And if you have any issues with those two things, then don't invest.
Or you have to invest such a small amount that it doesn't matter, right? Like burger and fries, you know what I mean? Whatever it is. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm definitely glad we had this talk. You know, very, very knowledgeable, and you know, I'm glad I got to pick your brain, not just on HEX, but a lot of other different things as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate you inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. I didn't want to have a blowout or a fight or anything. Like I said, the whole reason I'm out there is because I just want the most accurate information available to people, and I love accuracy. And I hope that through the explanation of things the way I did, maybe you can go back and pick out some of the parts that you like or that was useful. And ultimately, I don't want anybody to get scammed, but I also don't want people to miss an opportunity because some moron. I almost inserted a name. No, what the hell? Like some moron like Tony Vase is going to start a big fat fire. I'll tell you something about Tony Vase. This is my final. This is the bonus, the blooper reel, the final thing that may one day in the future get me in trouble if one day him and I meet. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I did say that about him. The truth is, and this is the truth, is that there are very, very, very few traders on Wall Street that leave and are really, really good. Mm-hmm. There's very few. In fact, it's a small number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tony Vase with his, he has a lot of credit because he's from Wall Street, but I'm looking at, I watched enough of him. I watched a lot. Nice thing about working for yourself, so you can watch a lot of YouTube when you want. And I love learning. And I watched a lot of that guy's YouTube, and I don't think he left because he was really good. That's shots fired, but I'm sorry. He wants to say Richard got wrecked. Dude, he got wrecked. How much money did you lose in the Bitcoin bear market? Like, dude, why aren't you still on Wall Street? Because the guys I know on Wall Street, and I am not in their class, I am not on their level, they pull in a couple million a year, right? And the middle guys, they're pulling in hundreds of thousands a year. So I would imagine if you're a capitalistic guy, which Tone clearly is, then the only reason you left is because you weren't that good. So who's really wrecked?
Yeah, but I don't know. But he charges 0.3 Bitcoin an hour.
Yeah. Why don't you just take it out of the market, bud? Because that's what I try to do personally. I'll never charge you for anything. I have indicators and I do analysis and models. I do the very best I can, and I make all of it as free as I can, at least especially to my group, the group that I'm a part of. I share everything with them. I mean, I have my edge, but I'll share my edge. You're not going to take my edge out because my edge exists with or without your participation because it's the way the market works, right? So it's a lot of dumb out there in crypto, right? And I appreciate you a lot in the fact that you were willing to just call me out, which I think is brave. It takes courage. We don't know each other. I mean, I think it takes courage to call out a guy you don't know if I'm going to come in here and act like Peter McCormick. Um, you know,
Well, I
and
don't want to have that type of live stream because that doesn't get anywhere.
that was
So
so stupid, right? I mean,
people can have.
I didn't even know who he was before that live stream came on. I had to look him up. But I tell you what, he really made everyone knows he made a pure ass out of himself. Like
Yeah, I
even
mean
people that really
he's.
like him are like, "Ooh,
Yeah, I've
bro,
never really
why?"
been a fan of him, but
It was horrible. But yeah,
yeah,
we could have that could have happened. I mean, so many things could have happened. We both went in blind, and I think we had a really productive conversation. I
yeah,
think,
I definitely think so.
um, man, I'm telling you, the crypto space is definitely most fascinating in terms of economics,
Hmm.
and I'll leave you with that. Like, this is a big fat white space to test new ideas and what's possible and stuff. And the main thing for us, because I was, I lived through the .com thing, and the rise of the internet. I was involved very early in the internet, for my age, and yeah, I was doing dial up with the modem and the whole thing, and yeah, there were. I guess I should say I was a part of a group of people in the way I was brought up and everything that looked at the internet like it was the devil. It
Hmm.
was Satan himself that was coming in and was ruining things. And when crypto gets big enough, that narrative will reemerge towards crypto. That is horrible. It's the devil. Maybe it already exists. It's used for criminal activity, right?
Right.
Um, but the thing is what I just don't want for anybody is I don't want you guys to miss opportunities. Um, Make sure that you protect yourself. You really understand what you're risking, manage that risk. But this is an economic green space, and if any one of us, and I'm not saying I am, but if any of us are clever enough to really I had Dan Larimer on my radar as a guy,
Hmm.
maybe this is the guy. But we're all looking for that next Bezos because whoever that next Bezos is, you hop his coattails, you give him all your money, and you get rich,
Yeah.
stupid rich in the
Yeah.
process because he's an operator, he's right, and he succeeds. So wherever you guys all end up, man, just keep looking for that winner, that winning entrepreneur that's actually producing value. It's involved in a value chain, creating value for the world. And when that character emerges, yeah, and it's it, I'd make a big bet. So
Yeah.
anyway, thanks for having
Well,
me on the
thanks,
stream,
Kurt. I
man. It's
really
been great.
appreciate it. Take care.
All right, brother. See you.
Take care. All right, guys. Well, I mean, you heard Kurt what he had to say. He's a really intelligent guy. I'm glad we were able to jump into the rabbit hole and talk about more things outside of Hex. Like I said, I'm not going to personally invest in Hex. I don't think you can build an economy around the centralized entity, and Richard Hart is obviously that entity. Um, Watch his videos though. I like his view on a lot of things. My only concern is this whole hex thing, but he's an intelligent person, and he does have some really great points as far as his Bitcoin mining and supply. He's just a very intelligent individual. So I suggest you watch some of his non-hex videos. But yeah, other than that, hex. I never. I don't like to use that word scam. A lot of people will. It's an easy word to use, but it's definitely borderline, very shady in my opinion. Um, hey, I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I miss out on the train, but if I'm right, you know, I can say I told you so, I guess. But based on based on what you guys learned today and what you heard, you come to your own conclusions. If you want to invest in Hex, you gotta remember to have all those things in play, whether it's the adoption amplifier with the Ethereum buckets. It's a game of chance. You put an Ethereum in there, you never know how much you're gonna get. The first day you're getting 48,000 hex per Ethereum. Today there's only 237 Ethereum in the bucket, so everybody's gonna get about 1.9 million hex. So every day it's a game of chance with that. Whether HEX has value or not, that's to be determined in the future. That's going to be based on free market, what happens with other people. So I think personally, what Richard Hart did was he kind of pushed the liability onto the free market and said, "Listen, your HEX is going to go up. Um, you're converting Ethereum that has actual value into HEX, which is basically a minted coin. You're kind of minting it out of thin air, and then you set a stake, you burn that all, and then at the end of your stake, you reaccumulate the invested amount plus your interest. So can the whole thing come to a halt? It can, but you need to go in, into the project knowing that one day that can happen. So if you want to if you like gambling and you want to go to the casino and throw $100 into it, you can. Nobody's telling you can't, but you have to understand that $100, just consider it gone. So hopefully you guys like the stream. We got a lot of really good information outside of Hex, the project, and I'm glad we were able to get Kurt on and pick his brain. So yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I'll catch you all on the next one. Peace.